You've got a little room left, though, here.
Well, you see, our house is
Yeah.
one of the ones that's moved back.
Oh, you already moved it?
Yeah, see, so we used to be in line with this.
Oh,
up
of
here,
course.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then it started to go.
Yeah.
And so we moved it back and we did a few other things, but this is year 54 for me in this location. In a row.
Wow.
Consecutive.
Gosh.
I
know.
It was a gentle, fully vegetated bluff with a few steps at the top and then kind of a gentle path all the way down.
Let's look at it.
And when you got down to the bottom, there was 100 yards of dune. And then you got to the beach.
Oh, gosh.
So I've been coming out here since I was 10 years old. My parents read about Nantucket. We came, checked it out. My father's a big tennis player. We loved Sconsit. And it was just a great place to be as a teenager. And, we've been hooked ever since.
I think, would you say that everybody here is in favor of what you're trying to do? Or are there some folks that...
Almost everybody. There are one or two.
Right.
There's a guy who I know pretty well who...
Did he move his house?
He has moved his house.
And he doesn't want to be
He bought his house about 10 years ago. He's kind of a developer, really.
Okay.
But, a long-term perspective, a decent guy. His view, and obviously it's always dangerous to put words in somebody else's mouth, but his view, really, when it comes down to it, is that he thinks that the undisturbed beach is number one, and everything else becomes secondary to that. And I can understand that, and I think that if most people felt that way, we wouldn't be doing this. But you can't have this community and an undisturbed beach. So we're trying to do something that's a balance, that will protect the community, will still have public access, will still have a narrower beach for most of the time. Maybe during some storms and high tide there won't be a beach, but you'll be able to walk along the top of the revetment. You'll be able to continue along the 82 miles of beach on Nantucket, and this one will be somewhat disturbed, but it'll be more beautiful in terms of the top will be fully vegetated again instead of denuded and a mess. And it's something that's done in lots of places. We're a stronger wave environment than many of them, but it can work. The engineers have put together a good plan that should hold up.
Why are you having such a hard time convincing the Concom that the impact won't be as extreme as they fear? Don't they fear the extreme that there's scouring? The word scouring's been used, that it's going to tear down anything that's not protected.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the scour question is something that has caught on so big everywhere. And people have thought that we should be getting scoured because our neighbor has been protecting the toe of his bluff for years with these jute terraces. And we aren't. We're not in that financial category, so we can't do that. And we're not being scoured. We continue to erode if you look at what's happened.
Do you mean this gentleman right here?
This gentleman right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
Bill said he tried it last year and it didn't work.
Well, what happened with Bill was what's difficult with the jute bags is that they'll work if they're there, but they need to be repaired after every storm. And you can't always get down there and repair them quickly enough. And so the next storm comes and it's not protected any longer, and so you lose. That's what happened here with my neighbor. Part of it was able to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
And then part of it got lost. It used to go all the way out. He lost actually 25 feet on that
That's
part.
why he's doing that site over there.
Yeah, he lost 25 feet on the northern end of his property because it had been protected for so long. So we're right next to that. We're not hurt, but we are eroding at the same rate as people who are not protected. So, the scour is something that's caught on in people's minds, but I don't really, we haven't experienced it. We've designed the revetment so that it comes in on an angle at the ends. There's extra sand at the corners to protect against that. We're committed to doing whatever it takes to avoid that. Not every revetment experiences scour. There's 1,600 revetments in Massachusetts. The people next door to the revetments are not all being scoured. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed.
Right.
They'd be illegal by now. So, it sounds good, but it's not really what happens. As far as why the Concom is having such a hard time, I don't know where this is going to end up, actually. There certainly are a couple of outspoken members of the Concom who ask most of the questions, and they're pretty critical. But we'll see what happens. We're still hopeful that the Concom will find a reasonable balance between protecting historic homes and communities and homes that were built before the Wetlands Protection Act, and so have a right to this kind of protection by law, and that they'll understand that maybe even if they wish that a revetment wasn't necessary, or maybe even if they didn't think it was warranted in some circumstances, that it's allowed by law here. And so, we hope they back that up.
Now, I remember shooting a bunch of meetings about 5 years ago, maybe even longer. At one time, the idea was to replenish the beach, right? And to get sand from out at sea.
Right.
And that didn't work, or that failed.
What happened with that was, that was a huge project. Okay, that involved 2.9 million cubic yards of sand, as opposed to 40,000 cubic yards that we're talking about here on an annual basis. So that was going to require huge dredging offshore and bringing the sand onto the shore and doing what they do in New Jersey and Florida and North Carolina. So we didn't invent that either, but
why didn't that work? Why didn't people grab onto that?
Well, I think that it became a controversy on the island, in part because I think the tipping point was charter fishermen were worried that kind of sand added to this beach was going to cover some of the habitat that the bait fish and the fish feed on. And this is a great striped bass fishery, and they didn't want to mess with that. And our thinking was that while it might have a small impact, it wasn't going to have a big impact, but it took off, and it ended up getting put on the ballot, and on an advisory basis. It wasn't a formal decision, but the island spoke 85-15. We don't want this. So we withdrew it. We sort of had to face reality that it was not going to fly. And so we backed off.
So is this the second major attempt at trying to do something to save
Well, no,
the
actually, we've been at it for 20 years.
I kind of gathered
so
that.
there was a project in the early 90s, through the 90s, that involved pipes and pumping stations.
I remember
it was
that,
called
the
dewatering, and it was
tried that.
It was impossible to keep the pumps from getting clogged, and didn't look like it was working in a lot of the locations, although in the one place where it worked really, really well for a limited period of time, in front of Codfish Park. Codfish Park built up like 100 feet that same year. So you still have people who say total coincidence, or it worked.
Oh, I see.
And so we don't know, but that was not the solution. That was too much mechanical. It wasn't working.
And so if this doesn't work for you, what could be the next?
Well, we're kind of focused on how it's going to work, and so I don't know that we're thinking about what we're going to do next.
Do we know when you'll know?
We had a small version of this that we tried to do a few years ago after the beach nourishment, the containers of smaller rocks called marine mattresses. We tried to get that through the Concom, and that lost 4-3 last fall. So after that lost, we were like, I don't know, what are we going to do next? And so we thought we were stuck for a while, and we're scratching our heads, and then we had this terrible winter, and then the road got threatened to the point where the town had to form a task force to figure out what are they going to do if they have to close the road, and how are they going to find an alternative route in. And started doing cost estimates, and it was exorbitant and incredibly divisive and involving land takings and eminent domain and forcing roads onto people's private land. And so that's when we stepped forward and said, why don't we do what everybody else does, or what an awful lot of other communities do, which we've been kind of trying to avoid for all these years, and put in a rock revetment. That'll work. And let's learn, in a lot of ways what we've done is learned from the experience of these large jute sandbags. If you can protect the toe of the bluff, you can plant above it, even when it's steep, and it works.
But if
the problem
comes,
but the problem is the bags won't stay.
Right.
So if the bags, instead of being bags, were rocks, it wouldn't move. So that's the idea.
The worst thing that could happen, a big storm comes, the big rocks get sunk, right?
Well, they're not going to get sunk all at once. What could conceivably happen is a big storm comes. The design of the revetment is such that it doesn't hold up as well as was expected. It needs to be repaired. It needs to be bolstered up into something that's stronger. That's kind of the worst that's likely to happen. It's not likely to come falling down like a house of cards. These are 5-ton boulders placed, on a foundation, going up at an angle. And, what the fishermen say is if that really were possible, that it would just all fall down, they'd be fine with it.
Oh, sure,
because it's more rocks and better habitat.
Yeah,
So,
right.
I don't think that that's very likely.
Right.
But it's not then a bunch of plastic bags. It's just rocks. So it's doesn't have the downside in terms of the impact.
All right. We could go on and on, but all that other stuff, the technical side of things, let's let other people deal with that and yourself. And I just wanted to come out and get you to tell me here on the bluff how important it is to you, because I know people are sympathetic.
Yeah.
I don't want you to think that people aren't. I am. I'm very much sympathetic. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think, but I have friends both for it and against it. So I just want you to know that, whatever happens here is...
I appreciate that, and we know that a lot of people are sympathetic.
Yeah.
We won a vote at town meeting a year ago to do a smaller pilot project, and people had thought, gosh, these guys are radioactive. Nobody's ever going to be for anything that they propose ever again. And, we won something at town meeting last year. We get a lot of support. There are people who are concerned. There are people who are unsure. There are people who are like, my friend a few houses down, who feel like the only thing to concern yourself with is an undisturbed beach and everything else is secondary. I get that some people think that way. I don't think it's anywhere near a majority of the island.
Is he going to be a problem? If you decide that you want to put rocks down, and is he going to say, don't put them in front of my bluff? Or that could be
actually, the part where the rocks would go in front of his house is still on town-owned land. So it's not on his private property.
Oh, I see.
There is some of the bluff that at the upper end of the bluff is private property that would be normally revegetated, and so he might say, I don't want anything there, but I don't really know.
I see.
So you start getting into some of the legalities.
I get you.
He's got his opinion. We continue to be friends. We talk. So I don't know where it goes, but
didn't the bluff walk used to be here?
Absolutely. The bluff walk went all the way
Yeah.
from the lighthouse to the village. Now it goes about halfway. It goes from the village to number 67 Baxter Road instead of to 119 Baxter
boy.
Road. And so it used to go all the way in front here, and we loved it. People walking by would say hello, and
Is that possible that could come back?
It is possible. It's going to take some doing. But if we stabilize the toe and revegetate, and the houses are positioned so that, in front of our house here, we've got plenty of room, so we'd be happy to have the bluff walk come back.
Right.
This guy next door,
Wow.
he's got 10 feet between his porch and the edge. And so unless he moves his house, which actually he's planning to do this winter.
Yeah.
But if he didn't move his house, you couldn't really have a bluff walk in front of that house because there's no room. So there's a few houses that are close like that where probably the
How
bluff
many
walk can't
houses
be.
have to be moved this winter, realistically?
Have to be. There are 8 houses that are within 15 feet of the edge. And not all of them will move this winter, but probably more than a couple of them will. There are 50 houses. There were 50 houses between the lighthouse and the end of Baxter Road. 12 have been moved off of their lot, some across the street, some other places on Nantucket, some demolished, sent to the dump. 8, like I just said, are very close to the edge. So that's 20 out of 50.
Right.
So we got 30 more, and we know which way it's going if we don't do anything.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it at that, and thanks so much for inviting me out.
Thank you. Great. Hey,
Yeah.
the
So this was your dad's bench? Oh, that's
my dad's
great.
bench. He passed away 12 years ago,
Oh,
and we feed it. See these?
yeah, I see that. Yeah.
If those were rocks, and above it, you can see how it's vegetated. Even above this, right here, it's all grass, right?
But he's growing that grass.
He's growing that
Yeah.
grass. Why? It doesn't slide down because the toe is held.
Right.
Now, if you look over just on the other side of the little arc
Yep.
there, it's all fallen down, no grass, because it all fell because these bags were not rebuilt in time for the last storm in March.
Did he
Boom.
rebuild those?
Yeah,
Oh, he did.
yeah, those keep getting
Those are
rebuilt.
personal. Why don't you do the same thing here?
Costs a lot of money.
It does. It's cheaper to get everybody involved in the toe, the big rock toe
Well,
idea.
it'll be less expensive, but it won't be inexpensive. It'll still be incredibly expensive, and it's going to take some creative financing to
I gotcha.
make it possible
Well,
for
the
people
other-
who aren't necessarily. I mean, are you rolling
Yeah.
still?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing. In fact, is sorting out a way
Well, I mean,
to
these
assist
are,
the
these
people who aren't in a position to pay the big bucks
Right.
to borrow it and have it maybe go on their property.
Well,
and
if
pay
it
when they
works,
sell.
then the property value goes up, and then they have something that they
Exactly.
makes sense. So I
Right.
understand.
That's why it's
course.
economically feasible to do it. You know,
Right.
if you're going to have your property go up by a
Right.
substantial amount of money, then the investment that you make
Exactly. I see.
is worth
I see
it.
why.